everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. I am Madison Lundquist, APQC's Principal Research Lead, and I am excited to kick off today's session about setting KPIs that resonate. So today we are joined by Donna Miller-Wallace, the director at WorkSafeNB, who has led the charge in transforming their strategic plan into a powerful organization-wide driver of success. In this session, she's going to share how to create that strategic plan that truly resonates, set those meaningful and inspiring KPIs, and help build that culture of accountability. We're excited to learn from her expertise, and I now welcome Donna.
Thank you very much, Madison and Kelly. So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Donna Miller-Wallace, and I'm Director of Corporate Strategy and Planning at WorkSafeNB. I've been in this position for a little over 3 years, and I'm here today to share with you some of the good things that I've learned and some challenges we've encountered. And hopefully at the end of this session, you'll have a few points that you can take away and perhaps use in your own organization when it comes to choosing KPIs that really make a lot of sense when we want to take care of our stakeholders and take care of who is truly important to our organization. So to start, I want to tell you where in the world I am, kind of like Waldo. Where are you? So I'm in a small province called New Brunswick, part of Canada, and it's on the east coast of Canada. And we share a border with Maine. So I was born and raised in this area, but I spent more than half of my adult life in Toronto and Vancouver, working in telecom. I worked in the software industry, supporting every industry imaginable, and all kinds of organizations with their corporate performance management programs, whether that was strategic planning or measuring and managing performance. Then I had my own little software company on the West Coast in Vancouver, and then eventually I moved back to my home province of New Brunswick. Now, New Brunswick is a very small province. Like I said, it's about 775,000 people, and we have three major cities. Moncton, Fredericton, and St. John. Now, I don't live in the city. I live in a place kind of like in the forest, kind of like on the bottom left picture that I'm showing. And the headquarters of WorkSafeNB is actually in the city of St. John, which is about 3 hours drive from where I live and where I work at home. Now, New Brunswick is the only bilingual province in Canada, and English and French are the official languages of the province. Now, I want to tell you just a little bit about WorkSafeNB, where I work. So WorkSafeNB is a Crown corporation, and we're committed to promoting health and safety workplaces in New Brunswick. Now, a Crown corporation, my understanding is it might be a little bit different in depending where you're located, but Crown corporations in Canada, and specifically New Brunswick, were structured like regular companies, a CEO, a board of directors, and so on, but we operate with the public interest in mind, and we act in accordance with all of the acts and regulations that are set by the government. So we report to the government, so to speak, as far as being accountable for acts and regulations and enforcing those within New Brunswick. Now, our primary objective at WorkSafeNB or WorkSafe New Brunswick is to prevent workplace injuries. And that's the ideal situation, is that we all work in a safe place and there are no workplace injuries and no occupational diseases. However, if somebody is injured at work, we do work with the employer and the injured worker to provide comprehensive rehabilitation services. We make sure that people don't lose a paycheck, that they keep being compensated, even if they've been injured at work. Now, I wanted just a little bit more level setting around the philosophy of how we operate, because this comes into, it makes it quite important when we're starting to identify our stakeholders. So I just want to give you some extra context to this. So way back in 1918, New Brunswick created its workers' compensation system, or the model. And it was based on a model. The picture of the man on the right is Sir William Meredith, and he was living in the province of Ontario, and he was this Chief Justice of Ontario, which is another province in Canada, in case you're not in Canada. So we put this workers' compensation system in place because we wanted like a healthy compromise where employers fund the workers' compensation system, they collectively share liability for it if and when a worker is injured. But in return, injured workers have a place to a role to play also because they would receive wage loss compensation and medical benefits while they recover from a workplace injury. But by doing that, they in turn they're not allowed to sue their employers. And I know that's not the same as in other locations, but across Canada, this is the rule basically, is that you don't sue your employer. You work with WorkSafeNB or equivalents to be able to get back to work safely and so on. But you don't get to sue people. So if I were to summarize what those bullets mean on the slide that I have, so really simply put, is that employers fund the system and that they fund the system at a rate of a certain dollar amount per $100 of payroll. So for every $100 of payroll you pay to employees, you pay a certain amount of money to WorkSafeNB, and therefore, the safer the workplace, the fewer accidents that occur at your workplace, the lower those WorkSafe rates NB will be that you have to pay. Now, employees who are injured, they get a reduced salary when they're off work, and it's funded by the employers of the province. Now, employees get incentive, I'll say, to get back to work because they don't get their full pay when they're off work, when they've been injured. They only get 90%. But we want to make sure they get back to work safely and to their full pay. And so sometimes that means that people will have to do modified duties or whatever until they can go back to their full duties of their job. Now, I've been a manager in multiple provinces in Canada, multiple different types of companies across my career. And to be honest, most of the places I work are in offices, and the most significant injury you could ever have is, a paper cut, maybe you bang your knee on a desk kind of thing. But the last job that I had was at a nursing home in New Brunswick. And so we had 60 residents in the nursing home. And that's where I became really exposed to the WorkSafe NB model and to this Meredith principle. And what I love about this principle is about the accountability component. So employers are accountable for providing safe workplaces and offering modified duties if an employee is injured. Now, employees accountable for reporting risks and giving the opportunity to the employer to fix those risks so there's no accidents. And also, employees have to report near misses, report an injury, of course. And WorkSafe NB, to fill that triad, is that it would be accountable for proactively assisting employers to make their workplace safe. And we're also accountable if an employee is injured, then we take accountability for making sure that they get exceptional care and they get back to work as soon as they can, but of course, get back to work safely. So to be successful, there needs to be a really close relationship between employers in the province, employees, and WorkSafe NB. And those relationships are really built at ground level on accountability and collaboration and trust. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. So if we think about, oh, I went too far ahead. If we think about what types of organizations do we serve, there's just a quick little snapshot of the types of industries in the province. We have a lot of manufacturing, retail, trade, and construction, and some of those are pretty risky businesses, and where where injuries can occur more easily than in others. But you'll also notice on this that we have over 11,000 small employers. And so to be able to reach out to 11,000 and influence over 11,000 small employers and over 3,000 medium employers, it's a bit of a challenge. Now, I want to get into a little bit more about WorkSafe NB from our vision, from our strategic plan perspective. So the vision of WorkSafe NB is to make New Brunswick the safest place to work. And I'm going to tell you that I want that. I really want it. Like I feel that because at one point in the past, before I started working at WorkSafe NB, my husband had an injury at work and lost a pinky, half a pinky. Now, it was one of the most terrible days of my life. Now, you might say, oh, it's a pinky. Yeah, it's a pinky. However, it was very traumatic for both my husband and myself. And I don't want anyone to lose a pinky at work. I want everyone to come home safely at the end of every day. I don't want anyone to get that phone call that I got from my husband's workplace about his pinky. So I believe this vision, like I want to work towards this vision. So trying to influence the achievement of this vision to be the safest place to work is one of the most biggest challenge of our prevention division at WorkSafeNB. So our prevention division is out influencing those employers I mentioned to be able to minimize the probability that any injuries are going to happen in workplaces. But realistically, I mean, that's a very lofty vision, right? So realistically, how do we create that? Like, how do we achieve that vision? And I think that it all really starts at the top. Like, I know it starts at the top. I'm at the point in my career that I've worked in a number of different organizations. And I know that even though an organization might have a fabulous board of directors, the rubber really hits the road the next level down with the executive team. So I want to tell you just a little bit about our CEO. I'm sure he will never see this video. So I hope he never sees this video. But Tim Peterson is our CEO. And I don't know how to describe him except to say that he is an accountant background, but he has a heart, like a huge heart. So I know a lot of accountants. I love accountants. I know many of them, but accountants, well, with huge hearts, may be a little bit hard to come by. But he has also surrounded himself with different leaders that have a really similar mentality because Tim, like all really great leaders, they know that they can't achieve their vision alone. They need to get every one of us involved with achieving that vision. He needs every single employee, all 500 of us, to be focused on the same goal, just like me, right? Focus on that vision in order to make it happen. Nobody send this to Tim, okay? I think he would be embarrassed knowing that I'm bragging about him. So when you're looking at this vision and you say, okay, from a practical standpoint, that's lovely. Like, but how, from a practical standpoint, how do you do that? And I think that, one of our board of directors members, Mel Norton, he is the president of our board. He had said this sentence at some point in the last few years and it just resonated with me. It's like through ongoing improvement and innovation. And that's a pretty simple statement. It's a simple statement that I remembered and hung on to. So ongoing improvement, well, that's pretty, like slow and steady wins a race and all that stuff. But innovation is a little bit harder, right? And you can't just go out and say, let's be innovative today. Some of that slow and steady and ongoing improvement will lead to some innovations. And so I believe that with the right focus, the right rigor, the right personal drive on the part of that small and mighty workforce like we have, anything is possible. And so in order to achieve the vision, we have to have some enablers in place. And on this slide are some of the enablers that we have put in place. We can't all be a bunch of fish swimming around in circles or whatever. We all need to be swimming in the same direction. Swim in the same direction will all 500 of us will get to the same location at the same time by working together. So we had to make some decisions, though, right, in order to put some rigor behind the movement towards our vision. So, first of all, we had to choose some appropriate frameworks or models to put in place that would resonate with our specific organization, right? Our leaders, our employees, our board, and then right size those frameworks in order to make it work for us because we're not a very big organization, only 500 people, right? So we call the big picture process that we operate around our corporate performance management process, and it very loosely follows maybe like 90%, 80% follows the APQC framework, execute and measure strategic initiatives. We've added some enterprise and operational risks into the model and so on, and some tweaks, but that's one of the foundational elements of our frameworks that we use. And we also use balanced scorecard. And balanced scorecard if you're not familiar with it, it started, in the 1990s. And I hung on to this model also because it's still popular across the globe as a management model, because no matter what industry you're in, balanced scorecard still works. It still makes sense. It helps you see your organization holistically and see if there may be any gaps that you're blind to. So if I were to describe balanced scorecard in one, I'm going to say a long sentence, a run-on sentence, I would say, balanced scorecard is we want to ensure that our employees have the tools, the skills, the knowledge, the environment, and the culture to effectively and efficiently perform all their business processes so that key stakeholder expectations can be met and financially you end up where you need to be, right? So that's what balanced scorecard is about. And I've used it in many different organizations and it's always worked as a model that is lets you see a holistic view of stakeholders and expectations. Now, my team was responsible for helping to choose some of those models, but we're also responsible for doing some of the practical work around implementing these models. Excuse me. So by creating tools, templates, procedures, and everything we need in order to help us align all those 500 people towards the achievement of the vision. Now, we do a lot of talking. I don't know if you can tell, we do a lot of talking. We ask a lot of questions. We double check alignment. We make sure that everybody is working towards achieving the vision, but also that some of that work that maybe wasn't really value add, that, we can stop doing it. So now we can make wonderful plans and we can have the best tools and the best models or ask all the right questions. But the tricky part of achieving a vision is really to look at the culture and have a culture where every voice matters, every idea counts. People are able to speak up, they are able to be heard. It's okay to make mistakes. That's a new one. A measure that's red leads to collaboration and not a slap on the hand. Successes are celebrated and we end up being in it together. And so when we set our values of accountability, collaboration, and trust a few years ago, these are referenced at all levels of the organization. We're walking the talk and we are using accountability, collaboration, and trust as one of those frameworks or models to help us achieve our vision statement. So when I'm going to get into a little bit more detail about our strategic plan. So I told you high level about WorkSafeNB and so on, but we began working on our strategic plan for 2025 to 2029, like it seems like a long, long time ago, but I guess it's a year and a half ago or more. And it was very important for us to first identify our stakeholders and all the key stakeholders and understand what their perspective was and where we were doing okay in meeting the stakeholder expectations, where we're not meeting expectations. And our main stakeholder groups in the province are workers, employers, the province, and since we're a Crown corporation, and our own employees. So that part was, fairly straightforward to get those high level groups. But we had to figure out exactly what each of these stakeholder groups wanted from us. So not just, in general, but very specifically. So I'm going to give you an example of how we tried to understand our clients' understand our stakeholder needs, but we're not able to focus always like really clearly on what those expectations of the stakeholders were and whether or not we're meeting the expectations of the stakeholders. So for years and years, we had a client satisfaction survey for injured workers. So each year we'd survey 1,000 injured workers. We'd ask them to give us feedback on their interactions with WorkSafeNB, any outcomes that they had for any claims they submitted, any conversations and interactions they had with their staff, and a whole bunch of other questions. The surveys were 16 to 20 minutes long, and the results, okay, it was like they're complicated, lots of tables, lots of numbers, lots of commentary. But the tricky part was that when we passed this around the organization, no one internally was actually able to take explicit actions that would produce tangible results. And the same thing when we realized that 300 employers, right, or employer representatives, we surveyed those once a year too. And what was really interesting about this is we might have been asking just the right questions of those employers in the province, but I think we were asking them to the wrong people. So the results of that injured worker survey and the employee surveys, the results didn't move any over time. It was like, and we couldn't get to the heart of what was important with those stakeholder groups. We weren't measuring the right thing, but we did get some information from those surveys, which we were able to use. Now, so it led us to many, many conversations with our stakeholders, and I will not go into the details of the months we spent having conversations with our stakeholders, but we needed to look at their expectations through a very different lens than the way we were doing it from before. So really, what do workers want from us? Not just the injured workers, like we were surveying before, but all workers. So as a worker in New Brunswick, I want to be safe at work. I want to come home safe and like alive at the end of each shift, right? And I want my husband to, and I want my friends to, and so on. But let's say a worker becomes injured at work. Well, what if somebody's injured? What do they truly want from us? And once we began asking some really direct questions, we realized they want a really quick decision to say whether their claim is accepted or not. And if they're losing time from work and not getting a paycheck, they want us to make sure that they can still pay their bills and feed themselves, feed their children, take care of their home. So we ended up with KPIs that resonated with those workers, which are the KPIs ended up being time to first decision, make a quick decision and tell me what happens, and time to first payment. I don't want to miss my mortgage payment. So when we started looking and having a lot of conversations with the stakeholders in the province that were the employers, then we had to look at this from a really different perspective too. So remember, I said that when that the employers of the province they fund the system, right? And they pay a rate of a certain number of dollars per every $100 of salary that they're paying out to their employees. Well, so what employers turned out wanting, they want to have stability. So if they're paying this amount every year per $100 of salary, they want to have stability in that. They don't want it to wildly fluctuate. They want to be able to plan their spending or plan not to spend, depending on how those rates were. And that rate is influenced by how many injured workers they have for you. So I just want to tell you just a tiny story about this rate and the meaning of this rate. So, because I want to kind of hit home of like how little fluctuations in a rate can have a lot of meaning. So, I used to manage a nursing home, like I said. Now, nursing homes typically have really high assessment rates compared to some other industries. So, in 2022, which was the last year I was at the nursing home, my rate for the nursing home was $5.66 per $100 of salary. So, for every $100 salary, I gave WorkSafeNB $5.66. No problem, little high, but whatever. But then I did some math and I realized that if I had a one penny decrease in assessment rate, then I could use that money, which we called for a person that we called a kindness ambassador. And the kindness ambassador was hired to sit with people who might be sick, they might be lonely, they might be dying resident. And so if I reduce that rate by one penny in a given year, then I could have that kindness ambassador sit with a resident for 20 hours, a one penny change. So if I reduced it from $5.66 down to $5, I could hire the kindness ambassador full time for a year. So that's what is really important to those employers is to have a stable rate. So every penny counts, right, for those employers, just like it did in my nursing home. So the KPIs that we measure associated with employers, those stakeholders, are assessment rate stability, want the same rates or very close, and we want to have one of the three lowest assessment rates in Canada of any province in Canada. And if we have one of the lowest rates of anyone in Canada, then we may be the go-to province. Businesses will come to our province because of those lower rates and the highest safety ratings of anywhere in Canada. So I just want to look at this from one other perspective too. So, like I said, nobody wants to be injured at work. Nobody wants to die at work, and nobody wants their employees to be injured and die at work. So there are two other KPIs that we wanted to measure and keep our eyes on. And these are kind of the outcome indicators of all the good work that we do day to day. Those two KPIs would be total injury frequency and severe injury frequency. And those ones hit closest to the heart, right? Because total injury frequency is like how frequently will a person be injured, right? In the province. But then also severe injury frequency is when, something like a death or something like, somebody loses a pinky like my husband did. And so those KPIs also most closely represent the spirit and intent of our vision of New Brunswick being the safest place to work. So, so whether we're looking at this from the employer perspective, the employee perspective, province of New Brunswick perspective, we all really want the same thing, right? And we, as WorkSafeNB employees, we also want the same thing. We want a safe workplace and so on, right? And so we also chose a KPI to measure our own employee engagement. Now, but in the end, it all looks like we want the same thing, right? Whether we look at it through the lens of an employee, an employer, the province, safety leads to prosperity for all of us. Now, we knew that when we were transitioning from our previous strategic plan to this current strategic plan, which is 2025 to 2029, we knew that all the KPIs were not effective and useful. Now, effective and useful, I use that quite a bit. But anyway, if anybody wants to know more details about it, I'm always open to taking questions. But so we wanted effective and useful KPIs to serve as indicators of the movement towards our vision, but we want them to be clear indicators of our stakeholder expectations. We want them to measure strategic objectives that we have, and we also want to be able to influence their performance. Because in the past, sometimes we might have KPIs where it's like, I don't even know I don't know what to do to fix this problem, right? And so in the end, we had to look at our old KPIs, do an evaluation to see exactly how effective and useful they were. The end result was that we had a few KPIs that were spot on, carry forward, they're great. A few needed some adjustments as far as what was, how they're calculated or what was, how they're defined. A few were just super duper complicated and difficult to understand, let alone take action on. And then we had a gap or two where we weren't measuring all the stakeholder expectations the way that we should have been. But in the end, we have a solid set of KPIs for 2025 to 2029 that we're very comfortable with. And oh yeah, I just want to show you this. So this is oh, now you can't see me. This is what our strategic plan looks like with our KPIs at the bottom. And every single person in the organization has one of these placemats that we can reference. Now, I want to go through in a little bit more detail because I'm comfortable to say that we have a pretty good set of KPIs, but I think that where we're differentiating ourselves and where we have differentiated ourselves is really where we have put together a rigorous process to choose the KPIs and get to the heart of each KPI. So we identified these 9 KPIs that I kind of high level referenced before. But we couldn't just say, here's a 9 KPIs, now go off and make it happen and go do this over the next few years and we'll, look at it and see how we're doing at the end of this 5 years. So our employees are the ones who help choose the KPIs and they help us also achieve the KPIs, right? That's their jobs, is to help us move the organization towards achievement of the KPIs. But we needed to make sure everything was super crystal clear and all the details and nuances of these KPIs were all defined so that people could be super laser focused on the achievement of the KPIs and not kind of spin ourselves in circles, which is what I've seen other organizations do sometime because we don't understand the KPI. So therefore, like just ignore it because obviously if nobody cares about defining it enough, then we can't influence it. So just forget about it. We wanted to make these real and tangible and make sure that employees could contribute to them. So we had defined a six-step process that I have on this slide to take us through and flesh out the details of the KPIs and enable our employees to actually work towards achieving them. So we establish owners for the KPIs. We like business owners for each KPI. My team worked with those owners to make sure that there were detailed definitions. We worked with our data team to get all historical data for these definitions, because remember, some of them might have been new or changed based on the stakeholder expectations. We reviewed all that historical data associated with those KPIs. And then I think this is the coolest part of all of this process is we worked with the business leaders and their delegates to identify influencers of the KPI's performance over the duration of the 5-year strategic plan looking forward. And only at that point, after we did steps 1 through 5, did we set targets for the KPIs. No setting targets by, dartboard or looking and seeing what somebody else was doing. We set the targets based on some real meaningful information and really meaningful conversations. So I'm just going to dig down a little bit into more detail around each of these steps. Because I think that this is something that is not typically done in organizations, and I think that it could be pretty meaningful. So when we talk about identifying business owners, we had to do a bit of a culture shift. So owning something, right, being the owner is not always giving people a warm and fuzzy. They don't always feel like, happy and safe, and they can end up being feeling a bit vulnerable if they're the owner for something. So we've had to coach business owners that this is a way to demonstrate our values and actions, being a business owner. So a business owner is accountable, responsible for collaboration with other people in the organization to solve business problems. And they trust that if there are actions taken to improve performance, even if the actions don't turn out as planned, it's okay, right? It's okay. So putting these values into action meant that people were feeling a little bit safer being a business owner for something. They didn't have to solve things on their own because we're a team, right? We need to collaborate. Um, and and also, especially around the red metric, there may have been a culture in the past where if a KPI was red, it's like, oh dear, something bad's going to happen. Well, that's not the case anymore. When we have a red metric, it's like, oh dear, what's happening? How can we turn this around? Or maybe it's something that we had already expected that was going to happen because remember we had planned and knew that something in the environment was going to change. So this first step, it was a big culture shift around identifying owners. And I will say this, I don't know where I heard this years ago, is like, if everybody owns something, then nobody owns something. Like that's real. It's like, oh, let's all be responsible. Then that means nobody's responsible. So it's very important to put that step into place. So when we move on to the second stage around creating detailed definitions, now you don't have to use the status quo for definitions for a given KPI or metric and you don't have to do what everybody else does in another province and another business is similar to yours and so on. You want to choose the KPIs and have the definitions that make sense based on what you have learned about your stakeholders, right? And we would include when creating these detailed definitions for the KPIs, we had those metric owners identified in the previous slide. They are the folks who would know the business processes being measured the best. And so we worked with them to create the detailed definitions of what made sense, what didn't make sense, what's in, what's out, what can we influence and what we can't. So it was a very significant step, and everything is documented, written down for reference so that everybody can know here is a definition for this particular KPI, and here are the pieces that we can influence. Oh. So step number 3 was around providing data. And that was the next step where we needed to get the business owners looking at the KPI with the definitions from before, get those exact definitions and the data associated with those definitions, get the business owners to look at it. Now, depending on the KPI, we typically would go back at least 5 years of historical data for some, operational KPI, further if it was something maybe that was measured, only once a year. And then we wanted to break down the KPI into its component parts also as a reference. And by that, I'm a bit of a math person, too much of a math person some days, is that I don't want to just see that we're, in the past we were 50%. I want to know 50%, was that 1 out of 2? Was it 100 out of 200? Like how good or bad are we, right, with the performance of this KPI? So breaking down that data in enough detail so that we could enable the data providers to do some of the next steps in this process. So reviewing the historical data was interesting because we had to look at that data and analyze it. And I'm not going to get into any detail on all the analysis tools that were used, but really looking for trends, anomalies. I don't know, like something like, COVID could have had caused some anomalies. Really understanding too some of the influencers of the performance of the past. So things that were happening in the environment that could have went well or didn't go well. And we really need to do that analysis, detailed analysis and understanding the past history for these KPIs as defined because we needed those in order to do the next step. And this is really in step 5. This was really interesting because, and I think this is probably my favorite step in this, is because we had our KPIs identified based on stakeholder expectations and what really mattered to them. We had really clear, crystal clear definitions, and we had everything documented. We had some historical data, but then we had to look forward. And sometimes this is the hardest part. This is definitely the hardest part. So the strategic plan would be for a 5-year duration. And so we wanted to be really thoughtful about how to set the target for each KPI, and because that was the ultimate goal. So we wanted to approach this from the perspective that we wanted every business owner and executive member and so on to think about the next 5 years and figure out what could happen in our control, out of our control, positive, negative, whatever, that could influence the performance of each particular KPI. We had very detailed conversations, and we had a full page of things that could happen regarding each KPI that we needed to consider when setting the target, the 5-year target for the KPI. So it was very fascinating experience. And I think that, even when we're doing like the what ifs and stuff of like, well, what if this happens in, financially, or what happens if interest rates go up or down, and like all kinds of interesting conversations. And it was a difficult because we weren't used to doing that kind of detailed analysis in order to set our KPI targets. So as I said, really the ultimate goal of all of those first 5 steps is we wanted to set meaningful KPI targets. And this is really the culmination of all those other steps. So we had the owner and the delegates and others who are familiar with the business processes look at that suite of information that we had provided them and looked at each step of the process, like the data, and we wanted to end up with a target that was meaningful and achievable, but also motivational. So all of the first 5 steps led to being able to choose a meaningful target. Now, I'm not going to say this process all went perfectly. Um, so, and there were some interesting conversations because when we went through this process, some KPIs have targets for 2029, the last year of the strategic plan, that are exactly the same as where we're starting in 2025. But in between, we needed to be comfortable, and we need to be comfortable knowing that there's going to be some ups and downs in those numbers. So we might be, 70% target for employee engagement in 2025, and it's 70% employee engagement in 2029. And the reasons why is because there's going to be some fluctuations up and down throughout those years because we're going through a lot of really big internal changes and big projects. And so some things are going to influence it up and down over those 5 years, but we have to take a breath when we see that the targets were the same here and into the future, because really we just want to have stability, right? Even though there might be little fluctuations year over year. But in the end, this process really did work. And in the end, we have a very solid and relatable strategic plan for 2025 to 2029. And we reference a strategic plan regularly in all team meetings, at our all hands meetings. Every one of us really are focused on putting these strategies in place and achieving these KPIs. And like I said, we really do have these placemats have been given to us that we can reference, right, when we're trying to figure out how can we contribute to these strategic plan KPIs. So this is my last slide. And in closing, I just want you to consider where you are on the KPI continuum, right? Do you just in your organization measure and report on your organizational performance? That's okay. That's good, right? Measure and report on your performance. Do you actively manage? So are you the middle circle where you actively manage your organizational performance? Or do you use knowledge about the environment, a really deep understanding and listening to your stakeholders and their expectations, look at historical data, set meaningful and well thought out targets for your KPIs, and then roll out the plan so that every person in the organization, even if it's 500 people or 5,000 people or 50,000 people, and make sure that nobody loses sight of where you're headed? And even better, do you use similar values like we do around accountability, collaboration, and trust to help you move you towards that future state that you've set? So no matter where you are on this continuum, no matter which little circle you are and where you are on your KPI journey, I hope that you are happy and you are healthy and you are safe.
That was great. Thank you, Donna. I want to remind everyone to drop questions in either the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to them as they come in. Quick question for you, or a question to start us off here, Donna. You talked about this accountability, collaboration, and trust, and it's so integral to a successful strategic direction. But what do you do when you have an owner who maybe doesn't want to be an owner? or they don't stick to the role that they're given. Give some words of advice, maybe, for those more
Mhm.
difficult people that are voluntold every once in a while to do their job.
Oh, yes. And we run into that. We run into that, right? Because it is a position of where you can feel uncertain, right? And what's going to happen if we can't perform and so on. But I think that that's where it comes down to the coaching and the reference of those accountability, collaboration, and trust. And I had a conversation just yesterday with somebody who said, "Oh, who was an owner who said, oh, what I'll do is I'll go out and do this to solve the problem." And it's like, hey, Mike, if instead of you solving this on your own, there's some other folks I know in the organization that can help, and that you're not in it by yourself, right? So there's a lot of coaching, a lot of really practical tools that can be used around, like when we create action plans. If Maddie, you were the owner for a KPI, the action plan isn't all Maddie's actions. It is, your action, my action, Kelly's action, so and so's action, but you just might be the owner who's presenting it, right, to the group, and having giving guidance and so on to other people who contribute to the business process. So there's a lot of conversation about measuring business processes, and we're not measuring you as a human. Red doesn't mean you're a bad person. Red means there's something going on with the business process. So there's a lot of coaching that my team and I do around those kinds of accountability issues.
Great. And there was some chatter in the chat when you were talking about that too, that it's the process that needs work, not you as a person. But then it's so good to remember that you're communicating with people still about the
Mhm.
process. So making sure to use proper change management techniques or different communication
Yes.
channels, things like that. Um,
And I'll just say something that is that we have monthly reviews of performance for KPIs and also strategic metrics that are drivers. And those meetings have evolved a lot over time. And at first it was very, here is my information. And now it's like, hey, here's what's going on. Here are the action plans we've taken. Oh, and I've been working with so and so to do this. And somebody and people volunteering like, oh, wait, I have an idea. I might be able to help. So it really has changed over the last couple of years. It's wonderful, fabulous. Sorry, I get all excited.
no, of course, totally understandable. Another question we have is what capabilities are most critical to move from performance management into performance intelligence?
Mhm. I think that a lot of it has to do with the cultural change around, like I keep using accountability, collaboration, trust, but also I think it's having really good, solid data and data governance. And so, and by that I mean from a really practical standpoint, is that sometimes people can be measuring, we think we're all measuring the same things, and we think, we're measuring apples. Well, you're measuring red apples, I'm measuring green apples. You're trying to fix one problem, I'm trying to fix another problem. And so having the really good data governance to support your business decisions is one of the, I think, the really critical things, so that everybody trusts the data.
Very important. What recommendations do you have to get an organization to focus their time and energy on adapting this type of approach, moving from strategic to practical, especially when the organization is being quite resistant to the methodology?
Mhm. I think one of the biggest things is to find an executive leader or a leader who believes in this also, right? And have them help be your advocate, because it really does start at the top. And so if you can find one or more people who are leaders who understand the value in moving the organization towards the vision and the KPI performance and so on, find those folks and then have them help. Um, uh, Put this kind of thing in place and justify why it needs to be done, but also find other people in the organization who it makes sense to, right? And so little pockets of supporters. And I think that really works well, I think, I would say.
And this is talking about your step approach, and they wanted to know if you could give an example of what step two definition would look like. And
Yes.
and then the second part of their question was, what does that example look like after step six? Like after a meaningful target is added.
Yes. So step two. I have to flip back what was step two.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Okay. So yes, the detailed definition. So I am very passionate about having detailed definitions. So it literally is written down, and we use a tool called Purview, Microsoft Purview, as a business glossary tool. So everybody knows this is what the KPI means. So it literally is KPI number one. And it describes out in words in like simple language is, number of apples is the name. So you have a naming convention. You say number of apples is the number of red apples that Donna ate on Monday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Right? So it's very, very clear. And if it happens that that is the sum of something else, then you have those elements broken down in detail. So it's super crystal clear. And that because too often people can get into these little like arguments about like, well, it means that or it means that. And so it's like take those simple problems off the table, right? Have everything defined, come very, very clearly in one central spot that everyone can access. And I'm sorry, Madison, what was the other part? Was it step six?
They were asking then what would that meaningful or what would it look like in step 6 once you have that meaningful target added?
Oh, yes. So when you have the target, and I'm literally talking about, it's employee engagement target for 2025 or 2029 is, 70%. It means that when we have a number, we have the KPI and we have the number, but what step six means is that because there's been all this analysis on anticipated variations and so on, that it eases some of those conversations when there are fluctuations, right? Is that we can see here was where we are, here's where we're at, here's where we want to be, and then the anticipated steps in between or things that could happen in between, and it lessens people's worry and reaction, I'll say, when a KPI is not performing where they think it should or whatever, right? Because we're anticipating some fluctuations. And it makes it really easy to explain to the board, to employees, and so on, that, the path to from and to and what we expect along that path.
Now, thinking about balanced scorecards, this participant said that it's the only performance management tool that their company uses, and they have over 10,000 employees. So if a topic or an indicator is not on the company scorecard, that topic doesn't get the attention it needs from top management.
Mhm.
So how do we balance, having way too many indicators, say 50 on this company
Mhm.
scorecard, or do we have
Mhm.
secondary tools besides scorecards? If you have any opinion on that.
Yep. So I've used Balanced Scorecard across really large organizations and small ones. And the way that I think about this is that there can be two levels of scorecards. I think of them as strategic and operational. So we might have the strategic ones are the ones that are the KPIs themselves and some, 8 to 10 drivers of those KPIs because the KPIs are long duration. So some drivers that you can look at every quarter, every month, whatever, right? And then there's the operate, and that is not a very big set of metrics on the balanced scorecard, but you can have that same balanced scorecard philosophy at the operational level and make sure that operationally, like day to day, you are meeting stakeholder expectations and you're enabling your employees and you're efficient with your processes. So I almost think of it as a two-tier balanced scorecard.
Right. Now, this next question, let me let me read it and try to summarize it for you. They say that many organizations tend to stall at measurement. So this KPI evolution of measurement to management to intelligence is a roadmap forward. With AI helping to accelerate some insights, they think success will depend on developing both human and AI competencies in tandem. So has your organization stepped into incorporating AI in any of this? And if so, how?
Yeah, so we've just put in place a new policy around AI because we have been cautiously optimistic with how AI could assist us. So we want to make sure because we're dealing with some very sensitive information, right? So some personal information that we want to make sure that we're using AI very responsibly. So we haven't used it very much with this process yet because we literally, like, I don't know, in the last 2 months put in AI policy in place.
And then this next question is, we have tried to set KPIs a few times and failed because people and managers can't see the iterations of the KPI measurements processes. And they're now going to go bottom up and set some performance indicators for teams and then departments, and then hopefully align with the corporate strategies. What is any advice or any opinion you can give for them there?
So I've seen this done successfully from both directions. So from top down and bottom up. And I think it depends a bit on your culture also. So I've worked with over, like in my past life, when I lived in Ontario, I worked with probably like at least 100 organizations who did similar types of things. And it depended on the culture of do top down and bottom up. But if you're doing bottom up, you must have the endorsement and agreement from top leaders that that's what's going to happen. Like they have to still agree that this is the model that they're going to do. So because the leadership from the top is super critical. Otherwise, it will just be like a little side project that doesn't get any movement, right? But you kind of have to start with what makes sense to people. It made sense for us to start at the top, even though we have so many operational metrics and things. We started at the top just because of the way the leadership mindset is here. But it can still be successful. You just have to have the support of
Yeah.
leadership.
All right, we'll do one final question. Oh, looks like two came in. So let's see. We'll do this one and we'll see where we are time-wise. How do you drive leading rather than lagging indicators with KPIs?
Well, that is an excellent question. And I think that it is very difficult. So we have in our list of KPIs, um, typically KPIs are the lag indicators. They're the outcomes of all of these things, right? Like I gave the example of the employee, I mean, of the surveys and things. But what we've done this time is it is kind of a balance of lead and lag. And because I say that some of these are influenceable day by day by day, like time to first decision, like somebody is literally doing that job of time decision. And what we've done is we've taken our KPIs and we've drawn, I know there's an official name for this, but we've drawn a picture where it's like, here's the KPIs and here's how each one influences each other. So it's kind of like this is a lead indicator of this, even though they're all KPIs, and this is a lead indicator of this. Like it is like so more around the relationships, right? But some of these KPIs are influenceable day by day, and some of them are the long outputs. So I think that we've done it like the long-term outputs, they have to do all these other things to influence. So I think that we've done a good job of balancing it, but it is a hard job. It is very, very difficult and takes time and patience, but don't give up.
All right, I will do one last question here, and I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. So this question is kind of two parts, but they're talking about mapping KPIs to the strategic objectives. So kind of
Mhm.
two parts here. One, do you have any general guidance on how many KPIs per strategic objective is part of it? And
Mhm.
then do you think of KPIs in terms of direct measures like hard dollar savings or indirect measures like customer experience that may have multiple KPIs related to them?
So around aligning objectives and KPIs to each other. So the way that our strategic plan is that we have objectives, we have 9 objectives, and we happen to have 9 KPIs, but they're not one to one. The objectives are more conceptual in nature, and the KPIs are hard, cold numbers, I'm going to say. So, um, I think of the objectives as the things that are cascaded down through the organization so that we can influence. I'll say, influenced by our behaviors and our actions and projects day to day, but it's not a one-to-one relationship between objectives and KPIs. And like I said, we have 9 objectives, 9 KPIs, but it's more of a grouping of objectives and a grouping of KPIs that are related, but it's not a one-to-one relationship. Maddie, can you repeat the second part of your question?
Yes, it was about, do you think of KPIs in terms of direct measures such as hard dollar savings versus
Oh, yes.
indirect measures like customer experience, which may have multiple KPIs with it?
Oh, yes. So we've in the past, we've done indexes of things, and the indexes have to be super clear, like a grouping of KPIs underneath. It has to be super clear what those lower level metrics are, that if you're having kind of an index, because indexes are harder, they're okay, but they're harder for people to understand, and they're even harder for people to influence, right? To know which piece they're influencing and be able to map that back and say, I influences this part, this piece of the KPI, right? So we have chosen that we want to get a lot more direct with, like, number of, percentage of, right? So that the rate, and it's like one number and no indices this time because it was too difficult for people to influence and feel connected to.
Super important to have that buy-in, and the harder it is to buy in, the harder it is to sell the value of it too. So
Hmm.
for sure.
Hmm.
Donna, I want to thank you so much. I know based on the emojis that were flying up as you finished up your presentation and the amount of chat and Q&A, people really appreciated all of the content. So thank you very much for presenting today. Just do a couple last notes here. You will receive a copy of the slides and the recording within a couple business days, so watch your email for that. Please let us know what you thought of the webinar today. A satisfaction survey should pop up at the end of the webinar. View our events page as well as on-demand webinars to watch past events. And then don't forget to connect with us on social media. It's where we post recent research, survey opportunities, as well as additional events and roundtables like we had today. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you again, Donna. We really appreciate your time and effort that went into this, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.